The day I stopped explaining didn't come after a fight. It came after exhaustion. The kind that settles deep, not in the body, but in the mind. The kind that comes from repeating yourself in different ways, hoping one of them will finally land. I had spent years explaining who I was, what I meant, and why I felt the way I did. I explained my tone, my boundaries, my reactions, my silence, and still it never felt like enough. If this story is touching you, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. I used to believe that if I explained myself clearly enough, things would change. That misunderstanding was the real problem, that clarity would fix everything. So I explained. I explained when something bothered me carefully, gently, with context and disclaimers. I explained when I said no, making sure it didn't sound final or threatening. I explained when I pulled back so no one would feel confused or abandoned. I explained because I didn't want to be seen as difficult. I explained because I wanted to be fair. I explained because I thought it was my responsibility. But explaining became a habit, not a tool, but a reflex. Every time someone questioned my feelings, I offered more detail. Every time my boundary created discomfort, I softened it with reasoning. Every time someone pushed back, I clarified again, slower, gentler, smaller, and slowly I noticed something. The more I explained, the less I was heard. Explanations didn't create understanding. They created negotiation. People stopped listening for my truth and started listening for openings, for places where they could disagree, reinterpret, or persuade me out of what I had already decided. My explanations became invitations. I noticed it in conversations that went in circles, and how my words were dissected instead of respected, and how I left interactions feeling drained instead of resolved. I wasn't communicating. I was defending my right to exist as I was. The moment that changed everything wasn't loud. It happened during a familiar exchange. Someone questioned a decision I had made, something small, but important to me. They asked why, with a tone that carried an expectation. An explanation. I felt the old reflex rise immediately. The urge to justify, to add context, to soften the truth so it would be easier to accept. But before I spoke, something inside me paused. I realized I was tired of translating myself into something more palatable. So instead of explaining, I said, "That's just what I'm choosing." The words felt strange in my mouth. They weren't defensive. They weren't persuasive. They weren't even detailed. They were final. The reaction was immediate. Confusion, silence, a subtle shift in energy. "But why?" they asked. And for the first time, I didn't answer the question they were really asking. "I don't need to explain it," I said calmly. That sentence landed heavier than any argument I'd ever made, because it changed the rules. I wasn't rejecting conversation. I wasn't being dismissive. I was simply refusing to negotiate my autonomy. The silence that followed felt exposed. Not uncomfortable, but revealing. I realized how much I had been over-explaining to earn permission for choices that were already mine. Later, when I was alone, doubt tried to creep in. Had I been rude? Had I shut down communication? Had I crossed some invisible line? But underneath those questions was something new, relief. I hadn't left the conversation replaying every word. I hadn't felt the familiar urge to send a follow-up message clarifying my tone or intentions. I felt done. In the days that followed, I noticed how often explanations had been expected of me. Not because I owed them, but because I had always given them. Requests for justification appeared in subtle ways. "Help me understand. I'm just trying to see your perspective. Explain why this matters so much to you." And sometimes those questions were genuine. Other times they weren't. I learned to tell the difference. When curiosity was real, conversation flowed naturally. When it wasn't, explanation only delayed resistance. So I stopped offering it by default. I'm comfortable with my decision. That's what works for me. I don't feel the need to justify it. These sentences felt firm but not aggressive. They created space. Some people adjusted quickly. They respected the shift, even if they didn't agree. Others seemed unsettled, like they had lost access to something they were used to having, my reasoning. Without it, they couldn't argue me out of myself. And that revealed something important. Explanations had never been about clarity. They had been about control. When I explained, I handed over power. I invited others to evaluate my choices, weigh their validity, and decide whether they were acceptable. When I stopped explaining, I kept that authority with myself. That didn't mean I became closed off or uncommunicative. It meant I became intentional. I spoke when I wanted to connect, not when I felt pressured to defend. I noticed how much lighter my interactions felt, how conversations ended sooner, cleaner, how fewer things turned into debates. I also noticed something else. People listened differently. Not everyone, but enough. When I spoke without justification, my words carried more weight. Not because they were louder, but because they weren't negotiable. I didn't need to convince anyone. I needed to trust myself. The most difficult part wasn't stopping explanations with others. It was stopping them with myself. I had spent so long questioning my instincts, demanding reasons for my feelings. That silence felt uncomfortable at first. But slowly, I learned to sit with my decisions without interrogating them. I learned that clarity doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it comes with stillness. If you're watching this and you're exhausted from explaining yourself, ask yourself this: who are you explaining for? Because people who respect you don't need convincing, and people who don't won't be persuaded by better wording. The day I stopped explaining wasn't about shutting down communication. It was about choosing self-trust over approval. And once you stop explaining, something changes. Your words become fewer. Your boundaries become clearer. Your life becomes quieter. Not because you withdrew, but because you finally stopped arguing with yourself.